Today, we are looking at the biggest downfalls of every UFC champion currently in 2024. First of all, we're going to start with a little bit of their strengths plus how they got the belt. And then the main thing we're going to focus on is their weakness and maybe who they could lose the belt to.
All right, let's get into it.
So first off, we're going to start off with flyweight. We got Alexander Pantoja. Dylan, what's his strength?
It's honestly his ability to win those scrambles in the octagon. With most of Pantoja's fights going to decisions, him being able to win these scrambles really helps him with the judges. Pantoja's scrappiness also makes him a tough matchup for basically every single flyweight he faces, and his unpredictability makes him a tough fighter to game plan for.
Yeah, I'd say it's tough to find a downfall for someone like Pantoja because as a flyweight, you pretty much have to be well-rounded in every aspect. Else you're just going to get out-wrestled or outstruck. So Pantoja has good enough striking. He has good enough striking to keep up with people like Steve Erceg or people like Brandon Royval. But then it's the fact that he's so good at wrestling and scrambling and just exerting more energy in those situations that he can really beat a Brandon Moreno or a Brandon Royval or a Steve Erceg. Even though almost all of those fights were pretty close, like he won the belt off Brandon Moreno in a split decision. Brandon Moreno had more significant strikes landed than him, but Pantoja had 6 takedowns compared to Brandon Moreno's 2 takedowns. And that's just what edged out the decision for the judges. So it's stuff like that. And same thing we saw with Erceg. Erceg was probably 2-2 going on into that 5th round. And then he really just got outclassed in the scrambles. He messed up once, and that's all it takes for someone like Pantoja, who has so much experience. He's beaten pretty much everyone in the division.
Exactly.
That's all it takes for you to lose to a guy like Pantoja. So I'd say, yeah, his biggest strength is definitely winning scrambles. For his biggest downfall, I think it has to be his striking defense.
It's a fair shout. Like when he is fighting guys like Moreno, like he is letting shots go through, and just because they are flyweights, it's not like he's getting knocked down or knocked out through them. But I mean, especially if you have him face like a Kai Kara France who has one-shot KO power, which is very like unprecedented in flyweight, like tough matchup for him. I mean, even what we just saw with Brandon Moreno in terms of volume of punches against Amir Albazi, like if you can go out and do that to Pantoja, there's a good chance you're the champion by the end of that fight.
Yeah, Moreno looked probably the best he's ever looked against Albazi. That might be due to the competition level that he was facing. Albazi is probably a little bit lower than Pantoja. At least what we saw that night, he definitely was. But Moreno did already go to a close decision with Pantoja. So what's to say next time he can actually land a couple more strikes? That's all it takes. 1 or 2 more big exchanges in a swing round is all it takes for Brandon Moreno to win that fight. Same with Steve Erceg. If he defended one of those takedowns in the final round and landed a big shot in exchange, that's all it takes for Pantoja to lose his belt. And so I think the fact that he does go to close decisions the majority of his fights, and the fact that he doesn't have great striking defense, he gets caught with elbows. I think Steve Erceg caught him with a couple elbows. He gets caught with big overhands. Like, he's definitely not invincible as a champion. I think you look at some of these super dominant champions, we don't have, I think Islam might be the most dominant that we have right now. And even then, he's not like super dominant.
Exactly.
With some of those guys, it's like you look at them and it's like, man, how is anyone going to beat an Islam Makhachev, which we're going to talk about later? But then you look at Pantoja and you're like, yeah, I could see like 2 or 3 guys beating him on a good night. It really just, I think it comes down to who has a good night.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the bantamweight champion, Merab Dvalishvili. And his strength is clearly his cardio. With Merab being in a smaller weight class and being a fighter who practically goes to decision every single fight, his gas tank is going to help him dominate those 4th and 5th rounds. His cardio also allows for him to be able to control long wrestling sequences, allowing him to dominate control time numbers.
Yeah, Merab doesn't really have the most strengths to choose from. It really is, he's literally a machine. Like, that's about it. He has decent... Can I even say decent striking? He has subpar striking for that division, right? I think that's fair to say.
In terms of the division especially.
Yeah, bantamweight has great strikers. So I'd say he has subpar striking compared to the rest of the division. You look at his wrestling, it's definitely a high level. I don't know if it's as technical or as skilled as someone like Umar or someone like Islam or someone like Hamzat. Those guys are S tier wrestlers that I just named. Umar might not be quite on the same level because we haven't seen him against like top level competition. So I'd say if you take a look at Merab and Islam, who are both champions, both have similar, they have wrestling heavy styles. I think that's fair to say. But then how does Islam have so much more excitement in his fights and so much more submission and finish wins? Merab does not have the submission capabilities. He's not a submission artist. He's not huge on jiu-jitsu. It's really just he works the hardest in his training camps. He has the most amount of gas tank than pretty much probably anyone in the UFC that I can think of off the top of my head. Maybe Bilal is pretty close to it as well. Bilal has crazy cardio. But when you think about Merab as a fighter, you think about the cardio. That's it. Now let's move on to his downfall. How is someone going to beat him? I think the lack of finishing ability is his downfall. You're pretty much, unless you're really bad, you're pretty much guaranteed a 25-minute fight with Merab, which is a good thing. We didn't see Sean O'Malley be able to take advantage of that, unfortunately, but there is always the chance that a striker, you always start on the feet. In the beginning of the rounds, you always start on the feet. There's a chance that a striker like Sean O'Malley, we even saw it with Marias when he faced Marias. Like Merab has gotten caught and almost gotten the fight finished. He's almost been stopped before. We saw it with Aldo too. Aldo's been able to catch him a couple times. And that's kind of the reason why people were going into that Sean O'Malley versus Merab fight thinking, well, Sean's a better striker than Aldo currently. Sean's a better striker than Marias. And Merab has been caught by all these guys. And I think we saw Merab's game actually evolve a little bit in that Sphere card fight because he wasn't as reckless. He was very calculated with his wrestling exchanges and very conservative. Did that make for one of the most boring title fights of the year? Yes. But it won him the belt, which is ultimately any UFC fighter's goal.
I think especially for Merab, with him being a wrestler, like everyone's going to come in and say that he's a stylistic nightmare for any striker, but the lack of his finishing ability on the ground lessens that nightmare matchup for any striker just because they're going to have 5 rounds that start on the feet. So what do you have, 5 minutes on the feet in total during the fight, like a minute at the beginning of each round and then throughout the fight? You're not keeping him on the ground for 25 straight minutes. Anytime that fight is on the feet is a chance you can get knocked out if you're Merab.
Yeah, so who do we think has the chance to beat Merab?
I would say Sean. I think even Jan and Figgy both have a chance, and I would say Umar. Obviously, I think Umar's striking is good, but his wrestling, he's just so well-rounded.
Yeah, I think Umar is the most obvious pick because he probably has the wrestling to keep up. He's like a small bundle of power, right? Similar with, people like Khabib. They're pretty big for that weight class. They're so good at cutting and just keeping muscle on. So they're super well versed and well strengthened in those wrestling exchanges and the scrambles. And I don't think Umar is going to let Merab get a one up on him in any of those exchanges.
Exactly.
And when you have your cousin Khabibi,
Habibi, my baby.
When you have cousin Khabib making your game plan, that's another thing where it's like Merab's in trouble.
All right, moving on. Featherweight champion Ilia Topuria. It's clearly his power, man. His boxing power is unreal. Ilia might be the pound-for-pound strongest guy in the UFC. His powers led him to knock out the former featherweight champion Volkanovski, a feat no other featherweight has done. He also was the first man to knock out or knock down Max Holloway. Topuria has that rare one-punch KO power for a featherweight. That means no matter how a fight is going for him, all it takes is one shot to retain that belt.
Yeah, and it's not even like... It's not just he has genetic ability that makes him stronger. We see it with Pereira. Pereira just has like this weird strength that people just seem to go to sleep when he touches them. Topuria has technique.
Yeah, his technique is unreal.
I think that's the big thing why he's able to KO all these guys. The way that he moves his hips and positions himself, that's the reason why he was able to get the KO on Max so well. And the way that he pushes people up against the fence and then creates space to get that KO, works the body and the head. He is like probably the best technical fighter in the UFC right now. His downfalls, though, it's very tough to think of one because he is so well-rounded. I'll give you my runner-up for his downfall. I think he actually does take a bit of damage. I think he lets punches get through a little bit, but specifically his face shows damage. We saw even just from a couple jabs, Volk made his nose red, like it was bleeding. And then we saw with Holloway as well. He had that mouse under his eye. I think it was under his eye. So he doesn't get hit a lot, but what he does get hit with, it actually shows quite a bit of damage on him. So in the future, he's still super young. In the future, when he has more scar tissue, I think that could be a bigger problem. If he has cuts above his eyes eventually, those could open up. Like we see Dan Hooker just has so much scar tissue from being in wars. It just opens up in the first round. Anyways, what I actually wanted to go with for his downfall is going to be reckless aggression. Topuria obviously has good, well-rounded capabilities everywhere, but when he's looking for a finish, sometimes he'll get a little bit overzealous because he wants a first-round KO. We saw it against Max Holloway where he did kind of he caught a couple big shots. He caught Max a couple times, and then he rushed in because he wants to follow through with his promise. He said he'd get a first round KO on Max. He does want to do that.
Exactly.
He wants to show out for the fans, but that's going to lead to him being open for exchanges, which we saw with Max, who's a high level boxer. Max almost won that first round.
Yeah.
I think if the judges didn't count that slip from Max Holloway, they thought it was a knockdown from Topuria. It was not. I've went back and watched that fight so many times. If they didn't count that, Max Holloway would have won the first round.
Well, and I think we have to take this into account with a guy who's bound to fight Topuria in the future, Diego Lopez, who his counter right uppercut is unreal. You know, if Topuria comes after him, Lopez could just get him with a counter with that uppercut, and it could potentially knock out Topuria or knock him down. Yeah. I mean, Topuria is still one of the most well-rounded fighters in the UFC, so he's going to be tough for Lopez. But if we're talking about anyone who has a chance, like Lopez realistically could have a chance with that counter uppercut.
Yeah, and even his chin is good. That's the scary thing. Topuria even has a good chin. We saw him get that wraparound head kick from Jai Herbert. That was even in lightweight, so he's up a division where they have more power. He was able to recover from that. It's one of the best recoveries I've ever seen. And it's even if Diego Lopez lands a great uppercut on him, I don't think Diego Lopez can one punch KO him. That's going to be tough. And with the wrestling ability that Ilia has, it's going to be almost impossible to beat him for a little while. All right, let's move on. We got Islam Makhachev next. What are his strengths, Dylan?
His takedowns. You know, he's cut from the same cloth as the greatest wrestler of all time, Khabib. It's no surprise that his sambo-based wrestling is as strong as it is. And while many have tried, no man has truly been able to stop the takedowns of Islam. Once you get taken down and your body hits that mat, it's basically over for you. Islam's takedown threat also helps elevate his striking, and I think this has allowed him to be able to compete on the feet with elite strikers like Dustin Poirier and Volk.
I think Volkanovski was the only one who was really able to compete with him everywhere. Like it was just a dogfight everywhere. He's able to stuff takedowns. He was able to get his own takedowns, which we hadn't really seen before. Arman is going to be a big test for him.
Exactly.
Someone who's in their prime, as young as him, who's as strong and as big as him, and who wants it as much as him. That's probably the biggest test that I'm looking forward to seeing Islam take on, because Arman has improved his striking a lot. I don't think it's as improved as much as Islam's, but we're going to find out probably at UFC 311. Right?
Yeah.
And then downfalls, I think his downfalls, there aren't really any, let's be honest, but it is going to be striking exchanges. If you look at the end of that Poirier fight, he actually did have a few cuts on his face, and Poirier didn't really get that many good strikes in. Like, if we're being real, he lost almost every exchange in the striking that he was in, which is unfortunate. It was closer than I think we all thought. We thought he was going to get dominated in 2 rounds, but in saying that, even in the striking exchanges, he couldn't win, but Islam took a lot of damage. So I think Islam, if he goes up against a real heavy power puncher that can land a couple shots, maybe Topuria, but Topuria is very small if he moved up to lightweight. I think Islam could struggle with that. Again, there's not really anything that Islam's going to struggle with because he is the most well-rounded fighter in the UFC right now. Like, what can he say?
Yeah, and let's move on to the welterweight champion, who's probably the opposite of well-rounded. Belal, remember the name, Muhammad. And his strength is his decision ability. You know, Belal is certainly, like I said, not the most talented fighter in the UFC. And and this has been shown by his lack of finishes. But Belal comes in to every fight with a great game plan on how he's going to get that decision win. And I think we saw against Leon Edwards. Especially with having Khabib in his corner now, Belal was able to come up with the ultimate plan to be able to come out and humiliate Leon. And Belal is one of the smartest champions in the UFC with his ability to get to the decision.
Yeah, I don't know if it's smartest. I mean, it's like it's not even like Hamza, but I'm saying like when you're a guy in the UFC who has such an obvious game plan, is that smart?
He can, yeah, but he can get to that game plan every time.
He can.
Khabib had the same game plan.
Yeah, that's true. I think Khabib's a little bit different level.
Yeah. Then,
But honestly, his striking didn't look bad in UFC 304 against.
It wasn't awful.
It's tough to say because we both think Leon looked
Terrible,
not the best, not up to standard, and Bilal mostly won those striking exchanges. He looked good in them, so prime Canelo is coming out of Bilal right now. For his downfalls,
I think it's basically the same from that we said about Merab.
yeah, I would say so. It's just gonna be that striking. Right? Like he can get caught by big punches. He has to go the full 25 minutes, 90% of his fights, right? I think he's only finished Sean Brady in recent memory, which is surprising, judging by Sean Brady's recent performance against Gilbert Burns. So yeah, it's just going to be the fact that he has 25 minutes to be KO'd, and we have seen him in that first Leon fight. It looked like Leon was dominating him quite a bit. So I think there's a real possibility that someone like a Prime Usman, the reason I say Prime is because I'm not confident in Usman right now, but Prime Usman, who's a dog in the clinch, who has great elbows, who has incredible wrestling, who kept up with Khamzat Chimaev, the best wrestler in the UFC. Don't come at me, comments. I think someone like that could win.
Mm-hmm. And I think even if we look at a guy like Shavkat, who's great in the clinch and is able to finish every single fighter that he faces, having to start 5 rounds on the feet with Shavkat is going to be scary for Bilal.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting matchups that you could have made. It did get made and it got canceled because Shavkat's going to be game to go to the ground, I think. Mm-hmm. And he does more damage when he's on the ground. And then that striking, Bilal's striking, I'm kind of interested to see how much it's improving. Did we kind of get baited with that Leon fight?
Smoking that Bilal
pack. Did we get baited with the Leon fight, or is he actually pretty good?
All right. Moving on to Dricus Du Plessis, and his strength is his strength and also his resilience.
Yeah, his strength is his strength.
Dricus has been on a great run over the last couple of years, scoring huge wins over some of the greatest middleweights of all time. Mm-hmm. Du Plessis' strength and resilience allow for him to use his awkward fighting style to his strength. Du Plessis is huge for a middleweight, making fighters like Adesanya look tiny. And I think Du Plessis is by no means perfect on defense, but his chin and his resilience allow him to keep pushing forward. And I think especially when he fights so awkwardly, like he's bound to eat strikes like we saw in that Strickland fight. He was eating shots from Strickland, but because he's so strong, so resilient, he was able to keep pushing forward. And his resilience combined with his pure strength just makes him a tough matchup for all the middleweights.
Yeah, this one was one of the most difficult fighters to come up with a strength, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
Because he's not a world-class wrestler. He's not a good striker. He's just
Dricus.
He's just Dricus.
I'm just Dricus. Anywhere else I'd be a 10. Isn't my destiny? I'll stop before you kill me.
Dricus is just a strong guy who can win the wrestling exchanges against a striker like Adesanya, but then he can win striking exchanges with someone like Derek Brunson. He can just kind of if you have a weakness, he can kind of play to that. Other than that, he's nothing special. Even though he's beat great middleweights,
it's like,
why is he beating them? How is he beating them? That's my biggest question. For his downfalls, I think it's his energy that he expends in the striking. He's just it looks like he's doing a front stroke every time he strikes.
And especially since he's so big, he's so muscular, everything just takes more energy out of him. Even 100%. When he finished Adesanya in the 4th round at 305, he did look tired. He was slowing down in that fight, and that's because he's huge and his striking takes so much out of him.
Yeah, we have to remember he had that nose surgery that opened up his nostrils or whatever,
nasal gland,
nasal canal. Anyways, that seemed like it actually helped him a lot, and now his cardio has looked really good in 5-round fights. Before, he was going 2 rounds and could barely walk. He literally was even in the Adesanya fight, we see him fall on his face and just grab a heel, and somehow he gets a takedown. It's so bizarre to me. Dricus is one of the most strange fighters in the UFC right now. It's hard to analyze him because whatever he's doing is obviously working. I can't tell why though.
Yeah, I mean, he's just holding that title nice and pretty until Hamzat comes for him.
Yeah.
Hamzat's going to kill you. Hamzat's going to kill you.
All right, let's move on. We got Alex Pereira. What are his strengths?
I wonder. Maybe the best striker in the UFC's strength is his striking. I mean, it's probably the easiest choice on this list.
Yeah.
Pereira has proven fight after fight that he might be the best striker in the UFC. And I mean, no matter if it's his calf kicks, his head kicks, his counter punches, Pereira can easily end that fight with one strike. You know, think about when Mark Goddard said about Pereira, how about when he was punching Roundtree, he had never heard shots that loud before. We've also seen levels to Pereira striking, fight to fight or even round to round. In the first 2 rounds of that Roundtree fight, he was fighting his typical calm, collected, just don't throw too much, just strategically place your strikes. But then when we got to the 3rd and 4th round, he looked like something that could only be described as prime Cody Garbrandt, you know, like he was ducking, weaving. We've never seen Pereira do the duck weave. Like I was like, whoa, Pereira. I mean, but yeah, like Pereira's striking is just on another level. And I think we've seen that now 3 times this year. And it'll be interesting to see when we talk about his downfall, but it's something that has never been tested because his striking is so good, really.
Yeah, his downfall is obviously just grappling in general. He just looks super awkward from what we've seen. It's been a while since we saw him grapple inside the UFC. But when he was on the ground against Adesanya, he just looked like he didn't know what he was doing. He was super awkward. He's really long and lankly. So I'm going to be interested to see Ankalaev fight because whatever Ankalaev says, don't listen to him. He's taking him to the ground.
Yeah, he's a weird cat.
He is a weird cat. So yeah, Ankalaev's going to take him to the ground. How is Pereira going to fare in those wrestling exchanges? Because Pereira is one of the most strongest and biggest light heavyweight fighters right now. Probably is the biggest. So taking him down isn't going to be easy, especially when he's going to be working on that for the last however many camps he's been in. And he's just gaining more MMA experience in general. He said in the Roundtree camp, this is like the first time that he feels like MMA has actually clicked for him, which is interesting to hear because he's already won 2 world title fights. So the fact that MMA is just clicking now is kind of bizarre. Imagine Pereira if he would have started MMA at like 18 years old. Prime Pereira.
But then he wouldn't have been smoking cigarettes, getting drunk every night, partying, doing crime.
It's part of the arc.
It's part of it. He wouldn't be Pereira today, you know?
Yeah. So I think grappling, it's going to be what's his name? Ankalaev. That's his name. It's going to be Ankalaev. That's going to be the only one who has like a fair shot at beating him. That I can think of. Carlos Olberg probably doesn't really have a shot yet. Volkan Oezdemir, I can't see him winning. It's really just Ankalaev. That's really the last big test. And then it's up to heavyweight, you know?
Speaking of heavyweight, let's move on to the final man on this list. Not John Jones, because...
Screw that guy.
We're talking about Tommy Aspinall right now.
Tommy.
And his strength is probably, I think, his striking, but specifically like his striking speed for a heavyweight. I think the combination of speed and power from Tom Aspinall's punches makes it a challenge to get out of the first round with him, let alone try to beat him in a fight. And I think we see this fight to fight with these heavyweights who are very powerful punchers, but the speed of Tom Aspinall's strikes allows him to land multiple strikes in the same time that these guys are trying to pull off these huge hooks, these huge overhand strikes. Like Tom's speed, it's unprecedented for the heavyweight division. You know, we don't see guys with this boxing speed like we do with Tom Aspinall.
Yeah, no, we've never seen it before. Everyone says he moves like a middleweight or even a welterweight.
Yeah.
He just moves so unbelievably fast. And he's trained with the Furies, who are some of the best boxers in the world. So that obviously helped. He thought about going pro with boxing when MMA wasn't working because boxing does make more money. He just has it all. He even has the grappling jiu-jitsu black belt since he was very young. This was another one where it's like, what really downfall does he have? There is one glaring downfall that people like to bring up all the time, which is what I had to go with because that's really all there is. It's going to be his tendency to start fast and get clipped. He bounces around a lot. He moves on that half moon arc all the time, going back and forth, which is great for a heavyweight because a lot of these heavyweights just cannot keep up with him. They can't see shots coming in and out. And he gets out of range so fast. But Curtis Blades clipped him. Sergey Pavlovich clipped him in the first round. It's only a matter of time until he gets dropped. And I do think he has a chance to recover because of his wrestling ability, but it won't look good if Tom gets dropped in the first 20 seconds, which is a possibility.
Yeah.
So it has to be the tendency to start fast, which is also his strength. You know, it's a strength and a downfall, but he does keep his chin up in the air as he's moving back, you know, like we saw Volk do against in the Topuria fight. That's not good. You can get chinned pretty easily if you get caught on the way back. It's what we saw Steve Ursay get chinned by. He was moving back, had his chin open, boom. Absolutely dead. And that's all it takes. At heavyweight, all it takes is one. We see what Tom Aspinall can do when he gets someone hurt. He just swarms them, and that's it. It's game over. So if someone can do that to him, I don't think it'll be John Jones. I don't think it'll be Cyril Gane.
Francis Ngannou.
Yeah, that would be really interesting just to see the speed difference. It's like pure power versus speed.
Pure technique, pure speed. You know, like Ngannou, no technique. Tom, all technique.
Yeah, and also Ngannou he is getting better on the ground. He's very good. He's not very good. He's good on the ground now. He's not going to be able to compete with Tom on the ground.
No.
He's not going to be able to hold him down like he did with Renan Ferreira. Tom, if he wanted to get bigger, he could. Tom could be a 265 heavyweight.
I think so. But then it would take away from his speed.
Exactly. So he doesn't want to do that.
He's at that perfect spot right now.
Facts.
All right. That is going to do it for us today.
All right. That is going to do it for us today.
Peace.
See ya.